She never said it out loud, but I could see it in her eyes every single day. The way her gaze lingered on my worn shoes. The brief pause when I talked about my plans. The forced smile whenever someone else mentioned success, promotions, or money. To her, I was already labeled. A man who had potential once, and lost it somewhere along the way. She thought I was broke. Not just financially, but in ambition, direction, and value. In her mind, I was standing still while the world raced ahead. And the truth is, I let her believe it. I let everyone believe it. Because sometimes the greatest power comes from being underestimated. Our mornings were quiet. Too quiet. She would scroll through her phone while I sipped cheap coffee, reading reports that meant nothing to her. When she talked about friends buying new cars or posting vacation photos, her tone carried disappointment, as if my lack of visible success was a personal failure. I never argued. I never defended myself. I simply listened. Silence became my shield. She didn't know that every choice I made was intentional. The modest apartment, the simple clothes, the absence of luxury. To her, these were signs of a man who hadn't made it. To me, they were camouflage. Because real empires aren't built in the spotlight. They are built in shadows, where no one is watching closely enough to interfere. She once asked me directly, "What are you really doing with your life?" The question wasn't curious. It was tired, almost resigned. I smiled and said, "Working, learning, building." She laughed softly, not mockingly, but dismissively, as if those words were things people said when they had nothing real to show. That laugh stayed with me longer than I expected. Not because it hurt, but because it reminded me why I stayed quiet. People reveal their true character when they think you have nothing to offer. She started comparing me to others. A former classmate who became a manager, a cousin who launched a startup, a friend's husband who bought a house before 30. Each comparison landed like a silent verdict. I was behind. I was losing. I was forgettable. And I let her think that. What she didn't see were the late nights after she fell asleep, when my screen glowed with data, projections, and confidential reports. She didn't hear the encrypted calls, the conversations that happened in coded language, the decisions that affected thousands of employees across multiple countries. To her, I was just working online. She never asked for details. She assumed there were none worth hearing. Sometimes she would sigh and say, "I just want stability." As if stability was something I couldn't give her. As if I was a risk, a gamble that wasn't paying off. I wanted to tell her that stability was already secured, that the ground beneath us was stronger than she imagined. But revealing the truth too early would have destroyed everything I had spent years protecting. So I stayed silent. There were dinners where she barely looked at me. Conversations that ended before they began. Her respect faded slowly, like a light dimmed 1 degree at a time. And the more invisible I became to her, the safer my secret remained. She thought success had a specific look. Expensive watches, loud confidence, public recognition. She didn't understand that the most powerful people rarely look powerful at first glance. They observe, they wait, they test loyalty and patience. I was being tested every day. When bills arrived, I paid them calmly, never late, never early. Enough to seem normal. When she suggested I should try something bigger, I nodded, as if I hadn't already done something far bigger than she could imagine. When she talked about leaving, about wanting more from life, I listened without panic. Because panic is for people who have nothing hidden behind the curtain. She began pulling away emotionally. I could feel it in small things. Less eye contact, shorter replies, a phone always in her hand. She wasn't cruel. She was just done believing in something she couldn't see. And that was okay, because belief given without evidence is rare, and belief given after evidence appears is worthless. One night, she said something that clarified everything. We were sitting across from each other, the room lit by a single lamp. She looked at me and said, "I don't think you're going anywhere." Her voice was calm, honest, final. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply nodded and said, "You might be right." That answer confused her. She expected excuses, promises, anger. Instead, she got acceptance. And acceptance made her even more certain that she was right about me. What she didn't realize was that I wasn't going anywhere. I was already everywhere. I had spent years building influence in silence, partnering without attaching my name, investing through layers of anonymity, learning every weakness in the system while everyone else chased attention. The empire wasn't built overnight. It was built patiently, brick by brick, mistake by mistake, while the world slept. And she slept too. She saw me as a man with no ambition because my ambition didn't look like hers. She thought I lacked hunger because I wasn't desperate. She mistook discipline for laziness and strategy for stagnation. That misunderstanding was my greatest advantage. The day she started emotionally detaching was the day I realized something important. She loved the idea of success more than the substance of loyalty. And that realization freed me. Because once you stop seeking validation from someone who doesn't see you, you become unstoppable. I stopped trying to explain myself. Stopped hoping she would understand. I focused entirely on timing. Because timing, not talent, decides when truth should be revealed. Every empire needs a moment of emergence. Mine was approaching. But at that time, in her eyes, I was still the same man. The one with no clear future. The one people whispered about. The one she felt embarrassed defending. The one she believed she would eventually outgrow. She thought I was broke. And I let her believe it. Because the most shocking transformations are the ones no one sees coming. The distance between us grew quietly, without arguments or dramatic moments. It was the kind of distance that forms when one person stops expecting anything from the other. She still lived beside me, spoke to me, shared routines, but emotionally, she had already stepped away. In her mind, she was preparing for a future that no longer included me. And I could feel it in the smallest details. She stopped asking about my day, stopped caring when I came home late. When I mentioned projects or meetings, she responded with polite nods, the kind reserved for conversations that don't matter. To her, my world was small, limited, and predictable. She thought she already knew the ending of my story. What she didn't know was that my days were becoming heavier with responsibility. Decisions I made in silence affected companies she had never heard of, markets she didn't understand, and people whose livelihood depended on outcomes calculated months in advance. While she thought I was drifting, I was being pulled deeper into something far bigger than either of us. I had learned long ago that visibility attracts interference. The more people know about your power, the more they try to influence it. So I stayed invisible. My name didn't appear on documents. My face wasn't associated with brands. I existed behind layers of trust, contracts, and code names. It wasn't paranoia. It was survival. She once joked to a friend while I was in the room. He's always busy, but I have no idea doing what. Everyone laughed. I smiled too, because explaining would have been pointless. People only believe what fits their assumptions. And her assumption was simple. If I was truly successful, she would have seen proof by now. She believed success demanded evidence. Cars, photos, applause. She didn't understand that some successes are designed never to be seen. At night, when the apartment was quiet, I would sit alone and review strategies that spanned continents. I studied patterns, risks, human behavior. I wasn't just building wealth. I was building control. Influence that didn't rely on titles, but on necessity. Influence that couldn't be taken away by public opinion or market noise. Sometimes I wondered what would happen if she knew. If she understood that the man she dismissed was already operating at a level she associated only with legends and headlines. But the thought always ended the same way. It was too soon. Revelation without readiness destroys trust. And I wasn't ready to share power with someone who had already stopped believing in me. She started talking about change. About needing something different. About people who knew where they were going. Each sentence was carefully indirect, but the message was clear. She was preparing herself to leave. Emotionally first, physically later. I didn't beg her to stay. I didn't promise that things would improve. That restraint surprised her. It made her more confident in her decision. She saw my calm as indifference, not discipline. Calm is often mistaken for weakness by those who live in chaos. One evening, she asked me if I ever felt afraid. Afraid of failing. Afraid of being left behind. afraid of ending up with nothing. I looked at her and answered honestly. No. That answer irritated her. She thought it was denial, arrogance, or worse, delusion. To her, fear was logical in my position. A man with no visible progress should be terrified. The fact that I wasn't only confirmed her belief that I lacked awareness. She didn't know that fear disappears when preparation is complete. Behind the scenes, the structure was almost ready. Years of groundwork were aligning. The board was watching closely. They didn't care about charisma or public image. They cared about results, loyalty, and the ability to see 10 steps ahead while others were stuck reacting to the present. I had been tested in ways she would never understand. Offered shortcuts and temptations. Pressured to reveal myself early. Challenged by people far more ruthless than she could imagine. And every time, I chose patience. Patience is expensive. It costs relationships. It costs comfort. It costs being understood. She paid no attention when I declined invitations, when I avoided social events, when I stayed detached from trends and gossip. She thought I was disconnected from life. In reality, I was deeply connected to the mechanics that controlled it. The more she pulled away, the more focused I became. Emotional detachment, once painful, became useful. It removed distraction. It sharpened clarity. I stopped trying to be seen by someone who had already decided I wasn't worth seeing. There were moments, late at night, when I watched her sleep and wondered if this silence was a mistake. If maybe I should tell her everything. If maybe transparency could save what was slowly fading. But every time I imagined the conversation, I saw disbelief in her eyes. Disbelief is dangerous. People who doubt you when you're nothing will doubt you even more when you're everything. And once power enters the equation, doubt turns into entitlement. I chose protection over confession. She began spending more time away from home. Networking, she called it. Meeting people with ambition. People with drive. She wanted proximity to visible success. And I understood that. Everyone wants to feel secure standing next to progress they can touch. I never questioned her movements. Never checked her phone. Never demanded reassurance. Control is for people who are afraid to lose. I already knew the outcome was beyond my control. And strangely, that gave me peace. The empire was reaching a critical stage. Expansion required leadership, not noise. The old CEO was stepping down. The board needed someone who knew every weakness, every silent agreement, every hidden lever. Someone who had been there from the beginning, unseen but indispensable. They were watching me. I felt it in the frequency of calls, in the tone of conversations, in the sudden urgency behind decisions that had been slow for years. The system was shifting, preparing for a reveal that would shock those who believed power announced itself loudly. Meanwhile, she was planning her exit in her mind. I could see it. The emotional suitcase packed long before the physical one. She spoke about the future without using the word we. She imagined a life where I was a lesson, not a partner. And that was fine. Because every transformation requires a sacrifice. Sometimes, that sacrifice is the person who couldn't wait long enough to see who you were becoming. I wasn't angry with her. Anger is wasted energy. I was observant, quietly noting how easily belief disappears when results are invisible. How loyalty is often conditional on appearance. The irony was almost poetic. The closer she came to leaving, the closer I came to stepping into a role that would redefine everything she thought she knew about me. About success. About worth. About the man she underestimated. But at that moment, none of that was public. None of it was real to her. To her, I was still the same man. Still quiet. Still ordinary. Still stuck. She thought I was building nothing. She had no idea how wrong she was. The day it happened didn't arrive with drama or warning. No music. No slow build-up. No sense that something historic was about to unfold. It began like any other morning, quiet and unremarkable, the kind of day people forget as soon as it ends. That was fitting. Life-changing moments rarely announce themselves ahead of time. She had already left the apartment when I woke up. A note sat on the table, brief and practical. She had meetings, plans, things to do. No emotion, no warmth, just information. I read it once, folded it neatly, and placed it back where it was. Routine had replaced connection, and we both pretended that was normal. I made coffee, the same inexpensive brand she used to tease me about, and sat near the window. The city moved as it always did, unaware that a shift was approaching beneath its surface. My phone lay face down beside me. I didn't check it. I already knew what was coming. When you've prepared long enough, surprises stop feeling surprising. The call came later than expected. Not urgent, not rushed, just deliberate. I answered without hesitation. The voice on the other end was familiar, steady, professional. No excitement. No congratulations yet. Just confirmation. The board had finalized its decision. Every vote was in. Every contingency reviewed. The structure was ready. They wanted me to take over. Not temporarily. Not symbolically. Completely. The title carried weight, but the responsibility carried more. This wasn't about money or recognition. This was about control of a system that moved quietly but decisively through markets, industries, and governments. An empire that didn't need to be famous to be powerful. I listened as details were outlined. Transition timelines, legal frameworks, public disclosure strategies, risk mitigation. Every word confirmed what I already knew. The moment had arrived. I agreed without pause. After the call ended, the room felt unchanged. The walls didn't move. The air didn't shift. Nothing about my surroundings reflected the scale of what had just happened. And that contrast made me smile. Because true power doesn't alter the room you're in. It alters rooms you'll never enter. I didn't celebrate. I didn't call anyone. I didn't feel the urge to share the news. I simply sat there, letting years of preparation settle into place. The silence felt earned. Later that afternoon, she returned briefly to pick something up. She barely looked at me. Her mind was elsewhere, already halfway into a future she was designing without me. She asked if I had eaten. I said yes. She nodded and turned away. She had no idea that the man sitting across from her had just stepped into a position that would redefine industries she relied on daily. No idea that decisions made in that apartment would ripple outward and eventually circle back to her life in ways she couldn't predict. And I didn't tell her. Not yet. The next few days moved quickly but quietly. Meetings happened behind secure lines. Documents changed hands without names attached. Strategies shifted. Power reallocated. I moved through it all with calm precision. Not because I was fearless, but because this was a moment everything before had been building toward. At home, nothing changed. And that was the strangest part. She still spoke to me with polite distance. Still treated me like a man in transition, someone figuring things out slowly. She talked about opportunities she was exploring, people she was meeting, options she was keeping open. Her tone suggested she was doing me a favor by keeping me informed. I listened, because listening reveals far more than speaking ever does. She assumed I was unaware of her emotional exit. That assumption gave her confidence. Confidence made her careless. And carelessness always reveals truth. I learned how she measured worth. How quickly loyalty faded when certainty disappeared. How easily she justified detachment when ambition wasn't visible. None of it surprised me. I had seen the pattern before. People rarely abandon others because they are bad. They abandon them because they appear stagnant. Visibility is everything to those who don't understand depth. The official transition date approached. Public announcements were being drafted. Controlled leaks planned. The empire had remained invisible by design. But leadership changes demanded a face, a name, a narrative. And once that narrative entered the world, nothing would remain hidden. I was asked how I wanted to be introduced. I gave them one condition. No backstory. No inspirational struggle. No dramatic reveal. Just facts. Just position. Just authority. Let people adjust on their own. Shock is more powerful when it isn't softened. The night before the announcement, she came home late. Later than usual. There was a new energy about her. Excitement mixed with resolve. She spoke quickly, telling me about conversations she'd had, possibilities she was considering. She talked about growth as if it was something new she had just discovered. Then she paused and looked at me. I think I need more, she said carefully. I nodded. I know. That response unsettled her. She expected resistance, questions, emotion. Instead, she got acceptance. and acceptance robbed her of the validation she wanted from the conversation. She went to sleep restless. I stayed awake, not anxious, not excited, just aware. A chapter was ending, and another was about to begin. Not just for me, but for how the world would see me. The announcement went live the next morning. Press releases, market reactions, internal confirmations. The empire stepped into visibility without explaining itself. My name appeared in places she followed casually, never imagining she would see it there. I didn't send her a message. I didn't say a word. I let reality speak. By midday, my phone was silent. I had anticipated that. She hadn't seen it yet. Or maybe she had, and disbelief was delaying response. Either way, I remained unavailable. Control includes controlling access. When she finally came home, her face looked different. Not angry, not sad, just unsteady, as if the ground beneath her assumptions had shifted and she was trying to regain balance. She didn't speak immediately. She looked at me the way people look at strangers they recognize too late. I saw something today, she said. I waited. She mentioned the headline, the name, the position. She said it slowly, as if saying it too quickly might make it unreal. I didn't correct her. I didn't confirm. I simply met her gaze. That's you, isn't it? She asked. There was no accusation in her voice. Just disbelief. Yes, I said. The word landed heavier than any explanation could have. She sat down, suddenly unsure of herself. The man she had categorized, dismissed, and emotionally abandoned was no longer who she thought he was. The story she had told herself for months collapsed in an instant. Questions flooded her face before they reached her lips. How? When? Why didn't you tell me? But none of them came out. Because answers wouldn't undo the past. They would only highlight it. I didn't feel triumph. I felt clarity. This was the moment when power reveals not just itself, but everyone around it. She finally spoke, quietly. I didn't know. I know, I replied. And that was all that needed to be said. Because part 3 of the story wasn't about success. It was about timing. About what happens when truth arrives too late to save what ignorance destroyed. And from that moment on, nothing between us could ever return to what it was. After that night, the air between us changed completely. Not with anger or confrontation, but with something heavier, uncertainty. She moved through the apartment as if it no longer belonged to her, like a place she had visited once and was now seeing again with unfamiliar eyes. Every object, every routine, every quiet corner carried a new meaning. And none of it made sense to her anymore. She watched me differently. The casual dismissal in her eyes was gone, replaced by hesitation. She noticed things she had ignored for years. The calm way I handled calls, the precision in my schedule, the absence of urgency in my movements. What she once thought was aimlessness now looked deliberate. And that realization unsettled her more than anger ever could. She began asking questions, carefully at first. Not direct, not demanding. Small ones, harmless ones. About when it started. About how long it had been real. About whether it was always this big. Each question revealed how far her assumptions had been from the truth. I answered selectively, not to punish her, but because not everything deserves to be explained after the fact. Explanations are for people who stayed when belief was required. She listened closely, nodding, processing, trying to rearrange the image she had carried of me for so long. The hardest part for her wasn't that I was powerful. It was that I had been powerful while standing right in front of her, invisible by choice. That truth forced her to confront something far more uncomfortable than being wrong. She had stopped seeing me before she stopped knowing me. Friends began calling her, messaging her, asking if it was true, sending screenshots, links, articles. Her phone lit up constantly, each notification reinforcing the same reality. The man she once felt embarrassed defending was now someone people wanted proximity to. Someone they spoke about with admiration, curiosity, even envy. She watched it all happen in real time, unable to slow it down. At home, she tried to reinsert herself into my life. Small gestures at first, offering to make dinner, asking if I needed anything, suggesting we talk. The effort was subtle but visible, like someone carefully stepping onto unfamiliar ground, unsure if it would hold their weight. I didn't reject her. I didn't embrace her either. Distance, once created, doesn't disappear just because the truth becomes attractive. She apologized one evening. Not dramatically, not with tears, just quietly, sitting across from me, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She said she hadn't believed in me, that she had judged too quickly, that she hadn't understood. I listened without interruption. Apologies are complicated. They acknowledge regret, but they don't erase patterns. And patterns are what define trust. I didn't think you were going anywhere, she admitted. I was wrong. Yes, I said. Not cruelly, not coldly, just honestly. That honesty hurt her more than any accusation could have, because it confirmed what she already knew. The damage hadn't been caused by malice. It had been caused by absence of faith. And absence is harder to repair than betrayal. She asked if everything could go back to the way it was. I didn't answer immediately. The truth was, the way it was no longer existed. Not because of my position, but because of what had been revealed about both of us. Success didn't change me. It revealed her. And it revealed me too. My boundaries, my patience, my limits. Outside, the world was reacting quickly. Invitations arrived. Interviews were requested. Partnerships proposed. People who had never known my name spoke about my vision, as if they had always believed in it. I moved through it all with measured restraint. Visibility was necessary now, but indulgence was not. She saw that too. The restraint. The lack of ego. It confused her. She expected arrogance, celebration, a dramatic shift in personality. Instead, she saw the same man, just no longer invisible to the world. That consistency made her realize something painful. I hadn't changed to become successful. I'd always been this way. The nights grew quieter again, but this time the silence carried weight. She stayed awake longer, scrolling through information about the empire, trying to understand the scale of what she had dismissed. She asked questions that went unanswered online, details that weren't public, context that only insiders knew. She wanted back in, not just into the relationship, but into the world she had unknowingly stepped away from. One night, she asked me if I had ever planned to tell her. I thought about it carefully before answering. I planned to tell the person who stayed, I said. She looked down. That answer settled heavily between us. It wasn't an insult. It was a statement of principle. Loyalty isn't proven after outcomes are clear. It's proven when the future is uncertain. She began to understand that my silence hadn't been deception. It had been protection, not just of the empire, but of myself. Revealing power too early invites manipulation. Revealing it to the wrong person invites entitlement. She had failed that test without knowing it existed. The realization humbled her. I could see it in the way she spoke, the way she hesitated before making assumptions. The confidence she once cared about leaving had been replaced by doubt. Not about me, but about herself. She asked if I still loved her. That question lingered longer than any before it. Love doesn't disappear instantly. It erodes. Slowly. Quietly. By the time people notice, it's often already transformed into something else. Respect, familiarity, regret. I care, I said. It wasn't the answer she wanted, but it was the truth. Caring doesn't always mean continuing. Sometimes it means recognizing when something has reached its limit. She cried that night. Not loudly, not dramatically, just soft, restrained tears. The kind that come from understanding consequences too late. I didn't stop her. I didn't comfort her either. Not because I was cruel, but because comfort can be misleading. It can create hope where clarity is needed. In the days that followed, she tried to prove she believed in me now. She spoke proudly about my role to others, defended my choices, explained my past silence as strategy. But belief after revelation feels different. It lacks risk. And without risk, belief loses its meaning. She noticed the shift in how people treated her too. The curiosity, the sudden respect, the subtle attempt to extract information through her. She realized, perhaps for the first time, how proximity to power changes perception. And she wondered if that proximity was what she had wanted all along. That question haunted her. I watched her grapple with it, not with satisfaction, but with a quiet understanding. This was her reckoning, not my victory. And everyone deserves the space to face their own truth. Eventually, she asked what would happen next. For you? I asked. For us, she said. I looked at her for a long moment. The woman who had once seen me as stuck. The woman who now saw me as something she didn't fully understand. The woman who had returned only after certainty replaced doubt. There is no us the way there was, I said calmly. That version ended before this one began. She nodded slowly. The acceptance was painful but necessary. She didn't argue. She didn't beg. She had learned, finally, that some moments don't offer second chances. She moved out a few weeks later. Quietly. Respectfully. Without drama. The departure was clean, but the impact lingered. Not as loss, but as closure. As for me, I stepped fully into the role the Empire had prepared me for. With clarity. With control. With the understanding that power doesn't just elevate, it reveals. And what it revealed that day left her speechless. Not because I had become someone extraordinary overnight, but because she realized she had been standing next to extraordinary potential all along, and walked away before it emerged. The silence after she left was different from the silence before. It wasn't heavy or tense. It was clean, honest, the kind of quiet that follows truth, not avoidance. The apartment felt larger, not emptier, as if space had finally been given permission to exist. I didn't rush to fill it. I let it remain exactly as it was. Life moved forward quickly after that, but never chaotically. The Empire demanded attention, not emotion. Every day brought decisions layered with consequence, choices that affected people who would never know my name, systems that would never show gratitude. I accepted that responsibility without ceremony. Power, when handled correctly, is not exciting. It is precise. There were moments when her absence crossed my mind, not as regret, but as reflection. Not every ending is tragic. Some are simply accurate. We had reached the natural conclusion of a story built on misalignment, not malice. She needed certainty before belief. I needed belief before revelation. Those two paths were never meant to run together for long. The world adjusted to my visibility faster than I expected. People always do. Shock fades quickly when replaced by advantage. Meetings became formal. Conversations became careful. Words were chosen not for honesty, but for positioning. I noticed the shift immediately. Respect given because of authority feels different than respect given because of understanding. I learned to navigate both without confusing them. There were those who reached out with sudden warmth. Old acquaintances, distant connections, people who had once overlooked me, now eager to remind me we had crossed paths before. I treated them all with the same neutrality. Memory sharpens when power enters the room, but I never relied on memory to guide my decisions. Only patterns. And the pattern was always the same. People value you most when they believe you can change their future. Very few value you when they believe you are still building your own. That truth no longer angered me. It educated me. I refined my circle intentionally. Fewer voices. Fewer opinions. Trust became a measured resource, not an emotional offering. Those closest to me were not impressed by titles or access. They understood the weight behind decisions, the isolation that accompanies leadership, the discipline required to remain steady when outcomes are uncertain. At night, I sometimes revisited the years when I had been invisible, not with bitterness, but with appreciation. Those years taught me something success never could. They taught me how people treat you when they think you are irrelevant, how quickly they stop listening, how easily they assign limits. That knowledge became invaluable once I stood where I stood. Because power without perspective becomes arrogance. And arrogance destroys empires faster than failure ever could. I never reached out to her after she left. Not because I didn't care, but because care does not always require contact. She needed to build her own understanding of what happened, separate from me. Closure that depends on explanation is fragile. Real closure comes from acceptance. I heard about her occasionally, through indirect channels. She was doing well, adjusting, learning. The story had changed her, as it should have. Experiences like that leave marks, not wounds. and marks shape how people move forward. I wished her well silently. Then I returned to my work. The empire grew, not outwardly, but inwardly. Stronger systems, deeper reach, fewer vulnerabilities. Leadership, I learned, is less about expansion and more about reinforcement. Making sure what exists can endure pressure. Anyone can grow something. Very few can protect it. There were days when decisions felt heavy, when outcomes were unclear, when the weight of consequence pressed harder than confidence. In those moments, I remembered the version of myself that sat quietly while being underestimated. That version never panicked, never rushed, never needed approval. I carried him with me. Public recognition increased, but I never chased it. Attention is a currency with hidden costs. The more you accept, the more you owe. I chose to owe very little. Let the work speak. Let results settle arguments. Let consistency build reputation. Over time, people stopped being surprised by my presence. They accepted it as fact. And acceptance is the final stage of power. Not admiration, not fear, normalization. When you reach that stage, you are no longer questioned. You are simply accounted for. I built my life with intention. Not extravagant, not minimal, balanced, secure. The kind of stability she once said she wanted, but didn't have the patience to recognize while it was forming. I didn't resent that irony. Irony is a teacher, not an enemy. There were opportunities to start again, romantically. I didn't rush into them. I observed. I listened. I paid attention to how people responded when there was nothing to gain yet. How they spoke when outcomes were uncertain. How they treated time, not just success. Trust is not built through admiration. It's built through endurance. Eventually, I met someone who didn't ask questions driven by curiosity about status. Someone who didn't measure worth by immediacy of results. Someone comfortable with ambiguity, grounded in presence rather than projection. There was no rush. No grand declarations. Just alignment. That felt right. I never told her the full story at once. Not because I was hiding, but because I had learned the value of pacing truth. Information shared responsibly strengthens connection. Information shared impulsively weakens it. She understood that instinctively, without explanation. That told me everything I needed to know. Looking back, I realized the story was never about her leaving or my success. It was about contrast, about how perception shapes behavior, about how belief reveals character, about how timing separates those who stay from those who return. She wasn't wrong to want more from life. She was wrong to assume she knew what more looked like. And I wasn't wrong to stay silent. Silence protected what noise would have destroyed. The empire didn't choose me because I was ambitious. It chose me because I was patient. Because I understood restraint. Because I knew when not to speak, not to show, not to move. Leadership is often defined by action, but it is sustained by judgment. That judgment was forged in years of being overlooked. When people now ask me about success, I don't give formulas. I don't offer motivation. I tell them this. Never confuse visibility with value. Never demand proof from someone who is still building in silence. And never assume you understand someone's destination based on where they pause. Because some journeys require stillness. She once thought I was broke. Financially. Ambition ally. Internally. She saw stillness and called it failure. She saw quiet and called it lack. She walked away believing she was choosing progress. And in doing so, she taught me something priceless. Not everyone deserves to see the full version of you. Some people are only meant to know the draft. The empire chose me not because I needed recognition, but because I didn't. And when the truth finally emerged, it didn't roar. It stood, unapologetic, unexplained, unavailable to doubt. And that, more than any title or position, was what left her speechless.